The first thing Emma noticed was the silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from a lack of sound. The small country road was framed by wind-tousled trees and the occasional chirp of unseen birds, but as she stood in front of the house, one hand still on the door of her car, the quiet pressed against her like something personal, not hostile, just deeply private. She adjusted the strap of her nurse's bag and took a deep breath. This was her first home care assignment. Fresh from the ward, where monitors beeped in chaotic rhythm and nurses moved in synchronized urgency, Emma had requested something quieter. She told herself she wanted to be closer to patients, to offer the kind of care that meant looking someone in the eyes instead of hurrying past their bed. But the truth sat deeper in her bones, unspoken even to herself. The ward had started to feel like a place where no one had time to feel anything. After her father died, she couldn't bear that kind of numbness anymore. The house was set back from the road, a two-story structure made of old stone and weathered wood. The garden out front was trimmed, but not overly so. It looked like someone had once cared deeply about it and now maintained it with quiet obligation. She rang the bell and waited. A long moment passed. She thought she heard movement from inside, the slow, deliberate steps of someone not in a rush for company. Then the door opened. He looked nothing like she had imagined. Emma had been briefed. Mr. Alec Marlowe, mid-50s, recovering from a recent surgery on his hip. No mention of a wife, children, or relatives. The file had described him as independent and resistant to excessive assistance, which she had taken as code for prideful or difficult. But the man who stood in the doorway was simply tired. Tall, broad-shouldered despite the cane he leaned on, Alec had a face carved from restraint. His hair was silvered and unkempt in a way that somehow looked intentional. His eyes, a muted blue-gray, lingered on her face for a fraction longer than politeness required. Then he stepped back and gestured without speaking. Emma nodded once and entered. The air inside the house smelled faintly of cedar and something more sterile, perhaps disinfectant or old wood floors too long untouched. She took in the room quickly, the heavy bookshelves, the worn leather furniture, a half-finished jigsaw puzzle on the table by the window. She'd expected a television playing too loudly or a home echoing with loneliness. Instead, it felt like stepping into the pages of someone else's memory. "Mr. Marlowe," she said gently, "I'm Emma Collins, your assigned home care nurse." "I assumed," he said. His voice was low, graveled by age or habit, but not unkind, just measured. "They told me someone would come today. I'm here to help with mobility, medication management, and—" "I know why you're here," he interrupted. "You'll find the paperwork in the study. I keep things in order." Emma paused. She wasn't unused to resistance. Some patients hated the reminder of vulnerability, but there was no hostility in his tone, just a tight-lipped courtesy that left no room for warmth. Still, she smiled lightly. "Good, that makes both our jobs easier." His gaze flicked to her then, something unreadable in the brief lift of his brow, before he turned and moved toward the study. She followed, observing the way he walked, careful, stiff on the right side, the cane absorbing more weight than ideal. Pain, definitely, probably a reluctance to admit it. The study was a room of precision, books alphabetized, papers neatly stacked, a vintage drafting table in the corner with rolls of blueprints carefully tied. Emma felt something shift in her understanding. Of course, he was an architect. The name had sounded familiar. She remembered reading about a Marlowe design years ago, buildings praised for their clean lines and subtle elegance. She hadn't made the connection. "Did you design this house?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Alec glanced at her. "My wife did." The words landed between them like a stone in still water. Not cold, not sentimental, just final. Emma said nothing. He moved to the chair behind the desk, sat slowly, then picked up a manila folder and handed it to her. "Medication logs, surgical notes, schedule from the hospital. I keep it updated." She took it with a nod, then sat opposite him. She read in silence, letting the room adjust to her presence. A photograph sat face down on the corner of the desk, its edge worn. He hadn't hidden it, only turned it away. She resisted the urge to reach for it. "I'd like to do an initial checkup," she said after a few minutes. "Vitals, check the incision site. Do you prefer the living room?" Alec hesitated, then nodded once. He stood, slower this time, and they made their way back into the main room. As she laid out her equipment, she noticed the fireplace was cold but clean, and the windows had been washed recently. He wasn't living in decay or neglect. He was living in pause. "Any pain today?" she asked as she checked his pulse. "Some. On a scale of 1 to 10. 7. She gave him a quiet look. "And you waited for me to ask instead of taking your meds." "I'm not in the habit of needing reminders." Emma didn't argue. She cleaned the incision with gentle precision, aware of the way his jaw tightened as she worked. Not from pain, she thought, but from allowing someone this close. You're healing well, she said, no sign of infection. He gave a short nod. She packed up her bag. I'll come every morning for now. After 2 weeks we'll reassess. My number in the file if anything changes before then. I don't expect to need it. Emma smiled despite herself. You might not, but you've got it anyway. As she made her way to the door, he didn't follow. She turned back once and saw him standing near the window, hand resting on the back of the armchair. Not watching her exactly, more like listening to a silence he didn't want interrupted. She let the door click quietly behind her. That night, Emma lay awake longer than usual. Her small apartment was quiet too, but not in the same way. Her silence held a kind of waiting. She thought about Alec Marlowe and the house that smelled of cedar and memory. She thought of the photo turned facestone and the garden kept alive by duty. She wondered what it would take for a man like him to let someone stay. Emma returned the next morning just after 9. The sky was soft with spring overcast, and the air carried that in-between chill that made her pull her cardigan closer as she walked to the door. She knocked twice and waited, listening this time not just for footsteps but for any small clue, movement, the hush of a cane, the weight of someone deciding whether to answer. When the door opened, Alec didn't say anything. He stepped back the same way he had the day before and let her in. This time she noticed he'd shaved. She said nothing about it. Good morning, she offered instead. Morning, he replied, voice slightly clearer today. The living room looked untouched from yesterday, books stacked beside the armchair, a fresh mug of coffee on the side table still steaming. The jigsaw puzzle had a few more pieces in place. She liked that. It told her he hadn't just existed between visits, he'd done something with the hours. Would you like to do the checkup here again? He nodded, it's fine. Emma set her bag down and moved through the familiar routine with practiced ease, noting how his posture shifted a little more fluidly today. When she gently pressed near the healing incision, he didn't flinch. You're improving, she said. Have you been walking more? I took a few laps around the hallway last night. That's good, movement helps the healing. Alec looked toward the window. I know. She hesitated, then sat back on her heels. You worked in design, right? Yes. I passed one of your buildings in the city a few weeks ago. It was a gallery, Hallow and Finch. Wide windows, natural light everywhere. You made that. I did, he said, the edge of something almost like pride softening his voice. It was one of the last projects I completed with my wife. Emma caught it how he didn't say before she died. Only with her, like the memory was still mid-sentence, not closed. What was her name? She asked quietly. He looked at her then long enough for her to feel the weight of the question. Not invasive, not prying, just gently offered. His lips pressed together before he answered. Lena. She smiled, it's a good name. Alec looked away again and the moment passed without comment. But it settled between them like something placed carefully on a shelf, acknowledged, now part of the room. After she finished the checkup, he stood slower than before but with more steadiness. Emma followed him into the kitchen, uninvited but not unwelcome. The counters were tidy, but a dish from breakfast sat in the sink. You cooking for yourself? She asked lightly. I eat what I can. She eyed the coffee and a lone plate bearing the ghost of toast crumbs. That doesn't count. I'm not hiring a chef. Emma grinned, no need, I'm decent in a kitchen. Maybe tomorrow I bring something. I'm not your charity case. I wouldn't insult you like that, she said, but you're my patient, and if you're not eating well, that becomes my problem. He leaned his cane against the counter and gave her a long, even look. You don't back off easy, do you? Not when it comes to someone's care. His eyes narrowed, but there was a flicker of something like reluctant respect in the look he gave her. You can bring something, he said at last, turning away, but I won't pretend to like it if it's bad. Emma laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise even him. Deal, she said. She left the house shortly after, the quiet not as heavy this time. As she walked back to her car, she passed by the edge of the garden. There, nestled near a bed of dormant hydrangeas, was a worn wooden bench. She almost missed it, tucked between the branches of a nearly bare tree and a moss-covered stone path. Something about it felt like it had once mattered, like someone had sat there every morning for years. She didn't ask him about it, not yet. The next day she brought a container of soup, chicken, rosemary, and lemon, simple and warm. When she unpacked it after the checkup, Alec eyed it with suspicion before taking a bite. He said nothing, ate slowly. By the fourth spoonful, he refilled the bowl without asking. Emma didn't hide her smile. After lunch, she lingered a little longer. There was something in the way the house exhaled when filled with sound. She told him about her old job in the ward, how she used to time her coffee breaks by the rhythm of shift changes, how the fluorescent lights had started giving her headaches. "You switched to home care because of headaches?" he asked, eyebrow raised. "No," she said, because it was starting to feel like no one had time to be human in there. Alec gave a small grunt, almost an acknowledgement. "And because my dad died in a place like that," she added quietly. He didn't look away this time. "Hospital." Emma nodded. "It was fast, pancreatic cancer. He didn't tell anyone until it was too late, didn't want to worry us." He was silent a moment, then "That's a selfish kind of love." Emma looked at him, or maybe he thought protecting us from the truth was his last way of being a father. Alec didn't answer, but she could tell the words sat somewhere close to him. He shifted in his chair, gaze drifting to the window again. Outside, the wind had picked up, tugging at the edges of spring. Leaves danced across the stones of the back patio, their movements small and erratic. "Lena liked the wind," he said suddenly. "She'd open all the windows on days like this, said it cleaned the air." Emma turned slightly in her seat. "Do you?" "No." His voice was quiet, not harsh, not angry, just resolute. "I haven't opened the windows since she passed." There it was, the first time he said it aloud. Emma didn't respond. She let the truth live where it landed, didn't rush to patch over it with platitudes or offers of comfort. Some grief deserved to be said without reply. She left a little later that day, but as she stepped out onto the porch, she glanced back. He was still at the window, watching the trees. Still listening for something he hadn't let himself hear in a long time. That night she made a note in her binder, not about medications or wound care but something simple. Day 3, Alec mentioned Lena by name, ate full lunch, sat longer than usual. Grief is present, but so is possibility. By the end of the second week, Emma knew which floorboard creaked in the hallway and where Alec kept the spare sugar tucked behind the tea tins. She learned that he drank his coffee black but added honey to his afternoon tea, and that he read late into the night, the soft glow of the study lamp always visible from the road when she drove past on her way home. She never said she noticed. Instead, she adjusted her visits to come a bit earlier, arriving before his pain had time to settle too deep in the joints. He never admitted it, but she saw the difference. In the way he stood straighter when she entered. In the way his voice found its way to her name now, not just her title. "Morning, Emma," he said one Friday, already sitting in his armchair as she walked in. "Good morning, Alec," she replied, setting her bag down. She no longer asked where they would do the checkup. She simply pulled the ottoman close and waited for him to shift his position. His body moved easier now, though stiffness lingered in the colder mornings. As she checked the incision nearly healed, she noticed something else. His breathing had slowed, but not from discomfort, from ease. "Do you sleep better lately?" she asked gently. He didn't answer right away. "Some nights," he said at last, "some worse." Emma didn't press. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small glass jar. "What's that?" Alec asked, eyeing it warily. "Lavender balm for the temples, wrists, helps calm the nervous system. I made it." He raised an eyebrow. "You think rubbing herbs on my skin will cure grief?" "No," she said calmly, "but it might give you one soft moment. Sometimes that's enough." Alec looked at her like he wanted to argue, but his hand opened slowly. She dabbed a bit of balm on his wrist, gentle but certain. The scent lifted into the room, a quiet, familiar sort of comfort. He didn't speak, but he didn't pull away either. After the checkup, she followed him into the garden without asking. It was the first time he didn't seem to mind. The bench she'd noticed on her second visit sat beneath the budding dogwood, its slats worn and moss-touched but still sturdy. Alec walked slower today, not from pain but from thought. "She used to sit here in the mornings," he said quietly, eyes on the bench. Coffee in one hand, her sketchbook in the other. Emma glanced toward the empty spot beside him. Did she design buildings too? No, she painted landscapes, mostly trees, sky, anything with motion. She sounds like someone who saw the world in color. She did, he said, even when it faded for everyone else. They stood in silence. The dogwood trembled in the breeze. From somewhere down the road, a distant lawn mower buzzed, a reminder that life kept moving, even here. "I used to bring her tea," Alex said after a moment. "Then I'd go back inside. I don't think I ever stayed long." Emma turned toward him. "Did she ask you to?" No, she never asked. She just looked over now and then, as if hoping. A small, aching pause bloomed between them. I don't think I realized she wanted me there until she was gone, he added. By then I'd convinced myself she preferred solitude. People say things without words all the time, Emma murmured. We just don't always know how to listen. He nodded slowly, the gesture waited. Later that day, as she packed her things, Alec followed her to the door. It had become a quiet ritual, but today he spoke just before she opened it. Tomorrow, could you stay a little longer? She looked at him. Yes, I'd like that. The next morning, Emma brought muffins, blueberry still warm from her oven. Alec didn't comment but took one and sat in the sunroom with the door cracked open, not wide, just enough to let in the scent of earth and spring. She took it as permission and joined him there. As they sat, the conversation wandered. Not deep, not heavy, just bits and pieces, like puzzle pieces from different corners finally finding a common edge. He told her about his first job designing a lakeside retreat for a poet who never moved in. She told him about a childhood trip to Nova Scotia, how she remembered the sound of waves better than the place itself. At one point he asked, why nursing? She smiled. I used to follow my mother on her rounds when she volunteered in a hospice. I liked the way she made people feel seen. I think I wanted that too. Did she ever regret it? No, but I think it cost her something. She never said it, but I saw how she held her breath sometimes before opening a patient's door. Alec nodded, gaze distant. You hold yours before asking about Lena. Emma didn't deny it. I try not to touch a wound without asking. Alec was quiet, then you're not like most people. Neither are you, she said softly. That afternoon, Alec walked without the cane from the kitchen to the garden. It was slow and stiff, but he made it. Emma didn't help unless he asked. When they reached the bench, he sat down with a breath that sounded less like effort and more like memory. I've been thinking, he said. Emma turned toward him. I have this room upstairs. It used to be her studio. I haven't opened it in a long time. She said nothing, waited. I want to open it, but not alone. Emma's voice was soft, then we won't do it alone. They waited until the sun was just starting to dip low, that golden hour where everything looked softened at the edges. Alec climbed the stairs with slow precision, and Emma followed just behind. At the end of the hall, a door with a brass handle waited. His hand hovered above it. I haven't touched this room in nearly 2 years. Take your time, Emma said. He opened it. The room smelled of dust and faint lavender. Sunlight spilled in through tall windows, catching on canvases stacked along the far wall. A sketchbook lay on the desk, its cover faded but untouched. Dried brushes sat in a mug beside it, their bristles splayed from old use. Emma stayed in the doorway, watching him move toward the desk. He didn't touch anything, just stood there, breathing in the quiet. She started painting again after her diagnosis, he said she didn't want to leave empty pages. Emma walked softly across the room, eyes lingering on the paintings, abstract skies, open fields, wind through trees. The colors were bold, alive, defiant. She didn't, Emma said quietly. Alec looked at her, and for the first time his eyes weren't just tired. They were wet, not with grief, but something quieter. Relief. She'd like you, he said after a moment. I like her already, Emma replied. They stood there for a while, the sun catching on the dust motes like snow in still air. No rush, no need to speak. And when they left the room, Alec didn't close the door behind them. Spring folded into early summer so gradually that Emma didn't notice the change until she walked up the path one morning and saw Alec's windows open. The scent of something faintly floral drifted from the house. Jasmine, she thought, or maybe the garden had finally started blooming again. She knocked once, then stepped inside without waiting. That had become their quiet agreement. If the door was unlocked, she was welcome. The first thing she noticed was music. Not loud, not insistent. Just soft jazz from an old record player somewhere near the study, the kind of music that curved into the corners of the house and stayed there like warmth. Alec stood in the kitchen, one hand on the counter, the other holding a mug. He wore a white button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he looked up as she entered with something dangerously close to a smile. You're early, he said. You opened your windows, she replied. He shrugged, figured it was time. Emma dropped her bag by the door and walked into the kitchen, nodding toward the mug. Coffee. Tea, he said, Lena's blend. I found a jar tucked in the back of the pantry. Emma raised an eyebrow and... He took a slow sip. Tastes like her. She didn't reply she didn't need to. Instead, she pulled a stool closer and sat, resting her arms on the countertop. I brought a new cream for the scar tissue, she said. It's a little stronger than the last one, should help with the tightness. Should I brace myself? She grinned, it smells like rosemary and stubbornness, you'll survive. He chuckled softly, the sound catching him by surprise. I'm beginning to think you like watching me flinch. I do, she said, but only because you pretend not to. Alec shook his head, but his expression softened. Later, as she applied the cream, she worked slower than usual. His skin was healing beautifully, but she could tell his body was still learning to trust itself. As her hands moved carefully across the tissue, Alec's voice broke the quiet. I've started sleeping in our bed again. Emma looked up, pausing mid-motion. It's strange, the room feels the same but not empty, just waiting. She nodded, sometimes grief doesn't leave. It just sits beside you until you remember how to live again. He tilted his head. Is that something you tell all your patients? No, she said, just the ones who listen. When the treatment was done, they lingered near the open windows. Outside, bees hummed around the lavender bushes, and the air carried the slow pulse of a summer not in a hurry. I've been thinking about the garden, Alex said suddenly. Lena used to grow foxglove, she loved the danger of it. Poison in a beautiful dress, Emma said. He looked over, startled. My mother was a gardener, she explained, taught me not to trust something just because it looked gentle. She must have been sharp. She was, and quiet like you a little. Alec didn't deny it. They spent the rest of the morning in the studio. Emma helped dust off old canvases while Alec read through his wife's notes, tucked in the margins of her sketchbooks. She never once mentioned her illness, but the final pages were full of sky, layers and layers of shifting light. She painted every day the last month, he said quietly, thumbing through the final pages. She was saying goodbye in color, Emma said. That night after her visit, Emma stopped at the grocery store on the edge of town. She bought soil, gloves, a tray of foxglove seedlings, and a potted hydrangea. It felt right to start with something that could come back each year. The next morning when she arrived, Alec was already outside, seated on the bench beneath the dogwood. Took you long enough, he said, eyeing the plants in her arms. I had to find the right ones, she replied, setting them down. He reached for the gloves beside her. I never liked hydrangeas. You don't have to, she said, they're for her. He stilled, then nodded once. They worked in silence, hands in the soil, backs warmed by sun. It wasn't fast, but it was steady. By the time the foxglove were planted, Alec sat back with a tired but satisfied breath. I forgot the smell of fresh earth, he murmured. Emma looked over, that's what it means to come back. He didn't speak again, but something in his posture had shifted, shoulders no longer curled inward, hands resting open against his knees. As if, for the first time, the silence wasn't a wall between them, but something shared. Later that week, Emma brought him a book. Poetry, he said, flipping it open. You think I'm that far gone? It's Mary Oliver, she said. She makes grief feel like something with wings. He read the first page without another word. She left it on the table by his chair. That afternoon, a thunderstorm swept through the valley. Emma stood near the kitchen window as rain streaked the glass in delicate rivulets. Alec moved slower than usual that day, the dampness making his hip ache, but he didn't complain. He only poured tea and handed her a cup. My daughter used to love storms, Emma said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Alec looked up. She'd climb into my lap and pretend to read, she added. Didn't matter what was on the page, it was the sound she loved. You never mentioned children. Emma's mouth pressed into a line. She passed. Years ago, she was only 3. Alec didn't look away. I'm sorry. I didn't tell you because it didn't feel fair. Coming here, seeing your grief, knowing mine is always waiting just beneath my ribs. He was quiet a long time, then he said, it does feel fair. She met his gaze. We're not meant to carry it alone. She nodded once, the ache in her chest softened by his words. Outside, the storm passed. The sky cleared, the light bending through the clouds in that golden way only storms make possible. When Emma left that day, Alec walked her to the door without his cane. Not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. By the middle of June, the house no longer felt like a place paused in time. The windows stayed open most days, letting in warm breezes and the hum of bees drifting from the garden. The radio in the study played softly when Emma arrived, never loud, never demanding, just enough to remind her someone had been there before she stepped in. And the foxgloves had bloomed, tall and delicate, their bell-shaped blossoms nodding in the sun like a quiet applause. Alec had started using the cane only when the weather turned. On dry days, he walked without it, slowly but with a steadiness that felt earned. Emma had begun spacing her visits further apart. It was time, and they both knew it, though neither spoke it aloud. One morning, she arrived to find two mugs already set on the table. His scar had faded to a thin, pale line, more memory than wound. When she touched it gently during her final checkup, Alec didn't even flinch. "Doesn't hurt anymore," he said. "Not the skin, at least," she replied, half smiling. He met her eyes, not the rest either, not like it used to. She nodded, closing her bag. There was nothing left to adjust, no chart to update, just the shape of something quietly changing. "I had a dream about Lena last night," Alex said, voice even but soft. "She was in the garden, painting. I didn't say anything, I just watched her for a while." Emma sat beside him, listening. She looked happy, not like she was waiting for me to catch up, just content. "What do you think it means?" "I think," he said, "she wants me to keep living, even if she isn't part of the story anymore." Emma reached for the notebook she sometimes carried. She hadn't read from it before, but today, the moment felt like it belonged to both of them. She opened to a page marked with a pressed dogwood petal. "To live in this world," she read, "you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go." Alec was still, eyes turned toward the window. "She was always better at letting go," he said after a long silence. "I held too tightly." "Maybe you were meant to," Emma said, "so she could go lightly." That afternoon they walked to the bench beneath the dogwood. The foxgloves swayed nearby, their colors bright against the grass. Alec sat down carefully, then gestured to the space beside him. Emma joined him, letting the sun warm her arms. The garden hummed with life. Somewhere down the road, wind chimes rang out in a neighbor's yard. "I want to show you something," Alec said. He stood slowly, then disappeared into the house. A few minutes later, he returned carrying a framed painting wrapped in linen. Emma watched as he unwrapped it. The canvas held a familiar curve of landscape, the garden bench, the dogwood in bloom, the soft suggestion of movement in the branches. But at its center sat a figure, indistinct yet unmistakably female, her hair swept back by the wind. "Her last painting," he said. "She never signed it. I found it in the closet a few days ago." Emma looked up at him. "She painted the bench." "She painted herself leaving it," he said. "I think that was her way of saying goodbye." The wind picked up gently, tugging at the grass, at the petals, at the stillness that had once ruled this place. Emma reached out and touched the edge of the frame. "You should hang it in the studio," she said. "No," Alec replied. "I want it here where she left it." They sat again and for a long time said nothing. It was not the silence of before, filled with weight and things unsaid. It was the kind that blooms in understanding, in peace. The kind that wraps around two people who have held their own grief and chosen not to let it harden them. The light softened as afternoon tipped toward evening. Emma knew this would be her last regular visit. Alec was well now, not only in body, but in the ways that mattered more. Still, she lingered. When she finally stood to leave, he rose with her. At the door, he paused. "You've done more than heal a wound," he said. "You reminded me what it means to be seen." Emma smiled, her voice quiet. "That's all I ever wanted to do." He reached for her hand, not a handshake, not formal, just contact, steady, certain. "You'll come back?" he asked. "Not as your nurse," she said, "but maybe as your friend." Alec nodded, something loosening in his chest. That would be good. She stepped out into the golden evening, the road quiet beneath her feet. Behind her, the house no longer looked like a place waiting for something lost. It looked lived in. It looked alive. And in the garden beneath the dogwood, the bench held its place, worn, weathered, and waiting, but no longer alone.